You're listening to the Heritage Podcast,
giving the British Muslim community a voice.
In this faith-inspired podcast,
we'll be talking about the most important issues we face at home and around the world.
Recorded at our new studios in the heart of the renowned BMHC.
We'll break down the national and global issues and chat about the small things which affect us all.
So tune out all the distractions.
Get yourself a cup of coffee
and enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Heritage Podcast. My guest today is Mohammed Amin. He has on several occasions been listed as one of the most influential Asians and Muslims in the UK. Born in 1950 in Pakistan, he came to the UK at the age of 1. After studying mathematics at Clare College, Cambridge, Amin did his PGCE and in 1977 qualified as a chartered accountant and joined PricewaterhouseCoopers. He became a senior manager in 1987 and in 1990 he became the first Muslim partner at the firm in the UK. He retired at the end of 2009 and now spends most of his time writing, speaking, mentoring, and he is actively involved in several community organisations. Amin was awarded an MBE for services to community cohesion and interfaith relations in Greater Manchester in Queen's Birthday Honours List in 2016. Thank you very much for joining us. So as I mentioned, you now dedicate your time to community projects. One of these is the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester, which you set up and now direct. What prompted you to start this initiative?
Assalamu alaikum. I was invited to a public meeting at Manchester Town Hall by Afzal Khan, who is now the MP for Manchester Gorton. And at that time, he was the Deputy Lord Mayor. And I knew him personally. And the invitation was to come and listen to a couple of people from London to talk about their interfaith activities in London. One of them was Rabbi Herschel Gluck, who is an ultra-Orthodox rabbi. And the other one is somebody called Ismail Aman, who, and they were in dialogue. Herschel Gluck had taken the initiative. He wanted to get to know the Muslims in the area. He simply went to the local mosque and knocked on the door and said, "I want to talk to you." And what they were doing was very inspiring. A few weeks later, there was another public meeting on the same subject to ask the question, should we do something similar in the UK, in Manchester? And I was one of the people who was quite enthusiastic about it. So I got involved in the organising committee and I've been involved ever since. And the reason I got involved, I've always been interested in other religions. Judaism in particular, at a religious level, is closer to Islam by far than any other religion, in my view, and vice versa, which is something, by the way, that often surprises many Christians. Many Christians think that Jews are quite close to Christians. They're not. Jews are much closer to Muslims than they are to Christians. And so I've been helping to run it for 15 years. Initially, the Jewish people were all complete strangers. You were walking on eggshells at all the meetings to avoid giving offense, etc. But as the years go by, you change from that situation to realizing that you become personal friends.
I mean, what have you learnt in your dialogue with the Jewish community, and has it impacted your faith in any way?
Oh, yes. First of all, I now know a lot more about Islam, because one of the early things I found myself doing, which I now do less of because there isn't quite the same need for it. I found myself giving talks at synagogues, for example, on Islam and what Muslims think about Jews, etc. And if you're going to talk about a subject, you need to know it. You need to learn about it. You need to understand it. So, for example, I remember in those early days searching for every reference in the Quran and indeed every reference in Bukhari to Jews, people of the book, etc., to see what was being said about them.
Okay. And I mean, like for myself, like I made Jewish friends at university, and it was only then when we spoke to each other about our practices, the cultural norms, I realized actually we have so much more in common than the media or sometimes stirrers people, lead us to believe. And it's so important to highlight the similarities we have rather than differences. And I think you have visited Israel yourself, you went to the Holocaust Memorial Museum. What impact did that have on you?
Well, let's take the two separately. Auschwitz, which is the the most important and worst of the death camps in Poland now. I went there in 2009 with 6 people from the Muslim Jewish Forum, 3 Muslims and 3 Jews. One of them was my wife. And it was grim. And you realize that you've thought about the Holocaust all your life. I mean, I wrote an article after I came back about how I felt about visiting Auschwitz. And it's the Holocaust has cast a shadow over my life, even though I've got no direct Jewish connections. I remember being aware of trials. I remember the trial of Adolf Eichmann. I was a very young news watcher, so not many 11-year-olds follow news around the world, but I was aware that Adolf Eichmann had been captured by the Israelis in Argentina, taken back to Israel, put on trial and hanged. And having read and heard so much about Auschwitz, actually going there was quite eye-opening. In particular, I had never quite understood the connection between Auschwitz and Birkenau. And sometimes people talk about Auschwitz-Birkenau. You have that gate with a sign over it, Arbeit macht frei, work makes freedom, the big lie of the Nazis. And you have that image of the railway lines running towards a building. What I didn't realize until I got there is that those 2 things are about 3 miles apart. There were actually 2 separate camps.
Okay.
Auschwitz was an old military barracks. Birkenau was basically an open field until the Nazis built a death camp there. And it's about 3 miles away, but it was under the same supervision, which is why the Auschwitz-Birkenau death camp was effectively one thing as far as the Germans were concerned. When you see, it's the little things that hit you the most. There's still an exhibit at Birkenau, or at Auschwitz, I think it was actually the Auschwitz camp, of a pile of human hair, because when women had long hair, the Nazis used to shave it off because they had a use for it before they put the women either to work sometimes, but mostly into the gas chambers. When children came, they were always sent to the gas chamber, of course, but the Nazis, first of all, took their shoes because they were recycling these shoes, giving them to German children. And when the camp was liberated, there's an enormous pile of children's shoes that were found, which are still there as an exhibit. And that really hits you.
Yeah.
So going on to Israel, what really struck me about Israel is, first of all, how spacious it is. I mean, you know that it's quite a small part of the world, the number, the population, etc. So you always think of it as dense, but it's like Luxembourg. You think of Luxembourg as small and dense. Actually, Luxembourg, which I've been to, has got massive amounts of open space, fields, forests, etc. And the same with Israel and the West Bank. Couldn't go to Gaza for security reasons.
Yeah.
But it's incredibly inspiring when you go to Jerusalem. It's such an old city. It's such a part of world history. And a few years ago, when I was giving a talk at a school in Bolton, a very ethnically mixed school, there were a lot of Muslim children there. And one of the pupils, I have no idea, I can't remember whether the pupil was Muslim or non-Muslim, because you don't remember everything, asked me, what's the most memorable place you've ever been to? Because I told them, they knew I'd been to a lot of places. And I didn't have an instant answer to that question. It's not one of those things I could instantly say, it's this one. And so I sort of thought aloud. I went through a list of places that I've been to and positive and positive aspects of them. But as I talked, I then converged on the answer. And the answer wasn't Mecca, for example, although I've been on Hajj. It was incredibly important from a religious perspective, and so was Medina. I'd been to places like Rome, Tokyo, New York, Washington, etc. But the place I chose as the most memorable place I've ever been to was Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is incredibly historic, far more historic in that sense than Mecca, in terms of you think about what's happened there. And it's of enormous religious significance to Muslims as well. It's Islam's third holiest city. And of course, if you think about the religious significance, not just to Jews, but to Christians, it's the place where Jesus was crucified, then, you know, Jerusalem absolutely has it. And The other thing, when you've been somewhere, when you see news stories, television stories, you connect with it far more. When I see shots of the old city of Jerusalem, which you often do, and one of the gates to the old city, instantly, of course, you recognize it, you know that you've been there. So it makes a really big impact on you. And if you haven't been to Israel, I would definitely recommend visiting.
Yeah, I mean, I visited 2 years ago, and I completely agree with the last point. So now I didn't realize like the Western Wall is right underneath where Masjid al-Aqsa and Dome of the Rock is. I didn't know the placement of everything. And I just found it had a really special energy. And you think of all the conflict that we all know that's going on there, but you walk around the streets and you've got Jews, Christians, Muslims living their life because the conflict is around them, but it doesn't affect their day-to-day life necessarily.
Absolutely. And just like I never quite understood Auschwitz and Birkenau, I always used to get confused about the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because people talk about them as if they're the same thing. People will look at the Dome of the Rock and say, that's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And of course, it's not. They are two separate buildings a few hundred yards apart.
Yeah, exactly. I had no idea, and I came home and I was showing my mum the photos, and she didn't know either. And it's a really amazing place to go, and I would highly recommend it to anyone. I mean, in terms of your own religion, when you were younger, you became agnostic, and after that, you say you became atheist. Why did you have this change in faith when you were younger?
I think it's very natural for young people to ask questions and to wonder. And being agnostic and being atheist are actually very easy decisions to make. The challenging question is not why do people become atheists? The challenging question is, why do people believe in a God which none of us have ever seen, a God that, unless you're a prophet, has never spoken to you? It requires an enormous act of faith. And sometimes in your life you have that faith, and other times you don't. And you can lose it, you can regain it.
Yeah, so after being an atheist for a couple of years, you joined an evangelical Christian body called the Worldwide Church of God. What was it that led you to Christianity?
They had a radio program and a magazine, and they read the Bible and had predictions from it, predictions about what was happening now and what was likely to happen in the near future, which sounded convincing. And remember, I was a teenager. I was 17, 18, 19 at the time. And that's why I signed up and joined them. They didn't have any physical presence in Manchester, so it was a sort of long distance membership. You read the magazine, you send them, bits of money. And that's also what led to my eventually leaving them, because their predictions, I realized, were actually not working out the way that they had predicted. Now, a lot of religious organizations make predictions, and when the prediction doesn't happen, they sort of change track. So Jehovah's Witnesses, you've heard of, their big prediction before 1914 was that Jesus Christ would return to Earth in 1914. That didn't happen, but World War I happened, and they said, we just got it slightly wrong. It wasn't that the Bible was predicting the return of Jesus Christ in 1914, it was predicting World War I. Well, either you buy that or you don't buy it. But anyway, I didn't buy it, which is why I abandoned the Worldwide Church of God, but I didn't abandon my belief in God. So I reverted to Islam.
And that was around the age of 27, I believe.
27. I've been a Muslim ever since.
And then, so why did you go back to Islam after leaving it? What was it that made you think, actually, this is the place for me?
Because Islam has the simplest and clearest theology. I mean, I understood Christian theology quite well by then. I've read the whole of the Bible, for example. And what I disagree with on the essence of Christian theology is this, that what saves you from going to hell is nothing that you do yourself in terms of being good or bad. It's believing that Jesus died on your behalf.
Yeah.
That, to me, just doesn't convince me at all. I believe that God judges people by what they do. You can argue about whether he's very strict or very merciful, But the idea that actually what saves you is what somebody else did and nothing to do, that God almost doesn't care what you do or how you behave, just doesn't compute. That's why Christianity has never attracted me.
And then after reverting to Islam, you say you didn't know a lot about the religion, but returning to...
And the other part of it as to why I'm not Jewish is that I don't believe in the concept of a chosen people. I believe in a religion from God for everybody. And the only real, if you look at Islam and Judaism, there are lots and lots of details, like wearing black clothes and tassels and stuff like that and Passover, but they're actually irrelevant. The essence of Islam and Judaism and what they say about the nature of God is the same. Where Judaism differs from Islam is this concept of a chosen people. And I don't actually believe in the concept of a chosen people, which is why I prefer Islam to Judaism.
Did you ever consider converting to Judaism, or
No,
was that wasn't? Okay.
But that is my intellectual explanation.
Okay. And has that been since you've worked with the Muslim Jewish Forum? Have you learnt these things and further analysed your own theology, or was this?
Well, you think about it you think about it in a more logical, rigorous way. So, for example, I had lunch with a very senior Christian who actually at Lambeth, it's a restaurant near Lambeth Palace. He just shown me around Lambeth Palace. It wasn't the Archbishop of Canterbury, and I've never said who it was, because during our lunch, when the guy was buying me lunch after showing me around Lambeth Palace, he said to me that as far as he was concerned, Christianity and Judaism were very close to each other, and Islam was very different from both of them. And I knew he was wrong. But by then, I've been helping to run the Muslim Jewish Forum for many years. I've been doing a lot of reading and studying. But when somebody's buying you lunch and has just shown you around Lambeth Palace, you don't want to start a fight with them. You don't want to argue. But what I did, I decided to write a rebuttal. And it took me a year because I was still working at that time, to get round to writing a handwritten draft, and another year before I got around to typing it, by which time I retired. And the article is on my website, Triangulating the Abrahamic Faiths. You can find it from the homepage of my website. And what it does is that it looks at Islam, Christianity, and Judaism and their relationship to each other, and explains very precisely and clearly why Islam and Judaism are so close. And Christianity is very different from both of them. But actually, Christianity is nearer to Islam than it is to Judaism.
Okay.
And there's one simple reason for that: Jesus and the virgin birth. Muslims believe that Jesus existed and that he had a virgin birth. Jews believe he existed, but they don't believe anything to do with the virgin birth.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've not considered that before. Moving on to a different conversion you had in your life, you say that it was natural for you to support the Labour Party growing up poor and working class. But in your 20s, you joined the Conservatives, and this was in the middle of Margaret Thatcher's premiership. So,
not quite my 20s, at the age of 32, 33, 1983 is when I joined.
Okay. So was that still during Margaret Thatcher's...
Oh yeah, because Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, and what really caused me to do it was watching a television series on BBC called Free to Choose, made by Milton Friedman, I think in either 7 or 9 or 10 parts. You can still find it on YouTube, and I've embedded the first episode on my website. I watched that television series. I then read the book Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. And bear in mind, in my 20s at university, I was a Trotskyist. I believed in Marxism and didn't believe in free market capitalism. Milton Friedman convinced me about the virtues of free market capitalism, something I believed in then, I still believe in now. And that's why I became a conservative, because Margaret Thatcher was transforming the country for the better.
So didn't policies like the introduction of the poll tax and the selling of the council houses, having come from a working class background, did that not make you question that decision?
Well, selling council houses is a policy that I don't have a fundamental objection to. In fact, I think there's a lot of positives in encouraging people to take pride in home ownership. The poll tax was a case of sort of bad implementation, but the concept that of having everybody make a contribution if they are part of a society rather than a situation where people vote in local government, but they feel they have no paying connection with what local authorities do. But the poll tax wasn't as daft as it sounds. It was a very unpopular policy, which is a separate issue, which is why we had riots. And by then, Margaret Thatcher, I think, had stopped listening to her colleagues. A lot of politicians are really good for the first sort of 10 years, and then they go off the boil.
Yeah.
And that's certainly the case with Margaret Thatcher.
I mean, looking at the poll tax, so it moved the burden of tax from the rich to the poor. I mean, what did you justify that to yourself at the time, and you still seem to stick by it?
Well, the first thing about the tax system is that I believe, and the Conservative Party accepts and believes, that the tax system should be progressive. But progressiveness is about the total tax system. It's about the total amount of tax that each of us pay. And rich people should not only pay more tax than poor people, but it's reasonable that they should pay a slightly higher percentage of their total income than poor people pay. That doesn't mean that every single tax has to be progressive. Just like VAT is a much less progressive tax than income tax. Inheritance tax is actually quite a very progressive tax because there's this big exemption, and most people don't have very large estates to leave behind anyway. So the fact that the poll tax by itself wasn't progressive isn't an argument to say we shouldn't have a poll tax. You have progressiveness, you have to measure the progressiveness of the whole tax system. And if you remember nothing else from today's conversation, remember that you can't judge any individual tax in isolation. You have to judge all taxes together to decide if the tax system is fair.
Okay, and then in terms of the selling of council houses, to this day, we still have a massive shortage. So do you blame the prime ministers that followed her rather than Margaret Thatcher for starting it off?
Yes, because the money that was gained from selling council houses, there's no reason at all why that couldn't have been used to facilitate the building of more social housing.
Yeah, I agree. And then in 2006, you became involved with the Conservative Muslim Forum. You served as vice chairman, deputy chairman, and in 2014, you became the chairman. Over half of Conservative members, who are 97% white, believe that Islam is a general threat to the British way of life. Baroness Saeeda Warsi, formerly the chair of the party, said that she couldn't encourage Muslims to join. In your 8 years with the Forum, why did you believe that Muslims should vote for the Conservatives?
Well, first of all, the poll that you cited is a good poll by YouGov of Conservative Party members, which was done in 2019. I think there was some more polling done in 2020 with the same kind of results. The thing to remember, first of all, is that the membership of the Conservative Party isn't static, it changes. And over the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of liberal-minded people have left the Conservative Party, like me, for example. Yeah. And a lot of people who, frankly, have very regressive pro-UKIP, pro-Brexit views have joined. So if you did exactly the same poll in, say, 2014, the height of David Cameron, I think you would have got different figures, although they would still not have been great, but they wouldn't have been anything like as bad as the 2019 figures, because you actually would be counting the views of different individuals to a large extent.
But even prior to 2019 even, there still wasn't great representation in the party.
But let me continue the point. The second thing to remember is that the membership of political parties is both very unrepresentative of the people who vote for the party nationally, and often very unrepresentative of the leadership. So the same month that this polling was taking place, showing what Conservative Party members thought of Muslims, Sajid Javid was one of the 5 people running for the leadership of the party and as a contender to be prime minister. And he didn't win, but he ended up as Chancellor of the Exchequer. So life is actually much more complex than just looking at one poll and deciding that's where we go. And you have to remember, you decide on a party based upon the totality of its policies and what it stands for. And there's nothing worse than a society where all the Muslims are in one party and all the Muslims are in another party, and all the non-Muslims are in a different party. That's crazy. It leads to a very badly divided society like India, for example.
Well, in 2017, 85% of British Muslims voted for Jeremy Corbyn's Labour and only 11% voted for the Conservatives. So why do you think voting for the Conservatives is such an unappealing prospect for Muslims?
Well, let me give you some more numbers too, because that helps to put it in context. 2010, about 15% of Muslims voted Conservative. That was all. The figures for 2005 I haven't seen, but I'm confident they would have been a lot less. So 2010, 15%. 2015, that had gone up to 25%. Then in 2017, it went backwards. And in 2019, it went even further backwards. Now, what's interesting and worth discussing is, why did it go up from 2010 to 2015? Answer: David Cameron himself had worked hard to promote the Conservative Party to Muslims. The Conservative Muslim Forum, we can't take all the credit for it by ourselves, but we definitely did our bit as well to help. Saida Varsi did her bit to help. When she became a cabinet member and chairman of the party, that news was worldwide. I was in Malaysia at the time, and it was on the front page of the Malaysian newspapers. And then the regressiveness in 2017, Theresa May fought a very quasi-UKIP kind of campaign. It was actually pretty aggressive. She was trying to appeal to former UKIP voters, and you can't appeal to former UKIP voters without other people like Muslims sort of noticing. And 2019 was even more of the same. So it's understandable how Muslims chose to vote in 2017 and 2019, but that doesn't mean that Muslims shouldn't be thinking positively about a lot of the things that the Conservative Party used to stand for. I'm not sure if it still stands for them, because the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson isn't the same as the Conservative Party under either David Cameron or one of my heroes, John Major, or Margaret Thatcher. Parties change over time based upon the impact of their leaders, what they're trying to achieve, etc. They're not static.
I mean, in your time with the Conservative Muslim Forum, did you encounter any Islamophobia within the party or with the members, or did they make you feel like you were welcome completely?
Overwhelmingly positive, welcoming feelings. And I belong to Conservative Party dining clubs. I'm used to going to black tie dinners where virtually everybody else is old and white and male, for example. You're always welcomed with open arms. Conversely, Conservative Home, the website which has blogs where I've written over 70 blogs, a lot of the below the line comments used to be full of bile and xenophobia. The thing is, anybody can comment, first of all, and so they're not necessarily Conservative Party members. You don't know how many of them are UKIP members, British National Party members, etc. But in terms of personal experience, people being directly anti-Muslim or Islamophobic, or I don't avoid the word Islamophobia myself, being hostile, anti-Muslim, xenophobic to me, no.
I mean, the month you were expelled from the forum in 2019, the reason they gave was because of the issue of Brexit, because you said you were voting for the Liberal Democrats. And the month after that, you resigned from the party when Boris Johnson was elected leader. So you mentioned him before. So what were the circumstances around these events?
Well, first of all, the real reason, as opposed to the stated reason why the party chairman wanted the Conservative Muslim Forum to get rid of me, was nothing to do with my having supported the Liberal Democrats. That was just the excuse. Just like Al Capone was jailed by the American government for tax evasion. It wasn't tax evasion why the American government was so keen to get Al Capone. It was all the bootlegging. I gave an interview on BBC Radio 4, the Today programme, and I was asked about what I thought about Boris Johnson. And it's 4 minutes long. You can still hear it on my website. You can find it quite easily.
Yeah, listen to it.
And I told them, quite frankly, what I thought of Boris Johnson, which is that he's morally unfit to be Prime Minister, and why I'm not prepared to be a member of a party led by him. And understandably, given the amount of coverage that the Today programme gets, that got picked up by the media a lot. I did 4 television appearances that day. And the party chairman at the time, Brandon Lewis, that same day was communicating with Lord Sheikh to basically say, you got to remove this guy from chairmanship. Now, the only way the Conservative Muslim Forum could remove me from chairmanship was to expel me. They can't actually deselect me as chairman because you're elected by the members, but they can expel you for bringing the party into disrepute or bringing the forum into disrepute. And that's what they did the following Thursday. They had a properly organized meeting. I was given the chance to defend myself. There was a secret ballot. I watched the secret ballot being counted. There were 13 members of the executive present, 11 votes to expel, 2 abstentions, namely me and my wife, and I was duly expelled. Didn't bother me because, apart from anything else, I knew it was very likely that Mr. Johnson would end up as party leader. So I was going to resign 4 weeks later anyway. And if you resign from the membership of the party, you have to stop being chairman of the Conservative Muslim Forum, or member of the Conservative Muslim Forum for that matter. So it was a case of leaving in a big explosion, which was quite fun, or resigning anyway 4 weeks later. So I wasn't bothered.
I mean, Boris Johnson's referred to Muslim women as letterboxes. He's called black Africans pickaninnies with watermelon smiles. Do you think he really is racist, or is he just playing to a certain type of crowd?
I have often been asked the question, do I think Boris Johnson is anti-Muslim, or indeed, do I think he's racist? And the answer I always give is, I simply have no evidence on the matter either way. If you ask me to guess, my guess would be that he's not racist. He is incredibly ignorant, though, which is something I learned a few months later, because a Guardian journalist sent me a scan of the chapter of a book. He wrote a book called The Dream of Rome in 2006, hardback. And when the paperback came out in 2007, he added on a chapter about the rise of Islam. And I was asked to read that chapter and commented. This was 2019, but it was a chapter he wrote in 2007. And when you read that chapter, you realize actually how little he knows about Muslim history, the rise of Islam, the contribution of the Arabs to scientific development and innovation for 700 years, etc. He studied classics at university. Classics is Latin and Greek. He knows a lot about Latin and Greek. You can't assume that he knows lots of other stuff. You can't assume, for example, that he understands quantum mechanics. If you want to know whether he understands quantum mechanics and theory of relativity, you have to test him. And it's quite clear from reading that chapter that he wrote, he actually doesn't know much about Islam.
I mean, aside from the Islamophobia, the other comments, I mean, you just know not to call African people pickaninnies with watermelon smiles. Does he just do it because of jumping on that Donald Trump-style populism? Or do you think he actually believes these things?
I think it says enormous numbers of things because he knows it will sell newspapers, because it will attract public attention. So I think a lot of it is done deliberately to annoy people and to get media coverage and publicity. Boris Johnson is a very intelligent man. He may be ignorant about Islam, but he's actually very intelligent. He was a King's Scholar at Eton. And to be a King's Scholar at Eton, you have to be very bright. And then, as I said, he studied classics at Oxford. You don't do that if you're dim. He's not dim.
Well, the other members of the cabinet, for example, the other members of the party, do they just support him because he is the leader and the conservative thinking is you support whoever's in power? Or have they finally found someone who agrees with their beliefs, because David Cameron was the complete opposite?
In 2019, the members of Parliament, who know how incompetent Johnson is in many ways, the members of Parliament, and for that matter, the grassroots of the party, but particularly the members of Parliament, were desperate to win an election that was clearly coming. And they saw Johnson as a good campaigner and a good election winner, and he is. He's an outstanding campaigner. He has a way of connecting with the man in the street, connecting through the camera, connecting through what he says to the media, etc. And you saw him driving that bulldozer through the wall, get Brexit done, great slogan, etc. He is a very effective campaigner. That's why he was chosen. He was chosen to win the election.
And so why was the issue of Brexit so important for you that you left the party you'd been a member of for more than 3 decades and joined the Liberal Democrats?
No, I didn't leave the party because of Brexit. There were 5 candidates, for example, and they were all pro-Brexit. Dominic Raab is as anti-European as Johnson. I would not have left the party had Dominic Raab become the party leader, or indeed any of the others. I've had disagreements on policy with all my life. Every time I've been in a party, you never agree with things 100%. I left the party because Boris Johnson, as a person, is morally unfit. I'd refuse to be led by somebody who is a congenital liar, to say to people, vote for this man who is deliberately deceitful all the time. Never opens his mouth without telling a lie, virtually.
Yeah.
And that's not true. People say all politicians lie. That is not true. I've been following politics since the age of 10. Occasionally, politicians know things that they can't tell you. They find a way of not telling you, misdirecting you. Very occasionally, they might even lie. If somebody had asked George Bush, are you going to invade Iraq next Tuesday? And he would probably have said no, even if the war plan was to invade next Tuesday, because you don't give that kind of detail away. But most of the time, politicians try to tell most of the truth. Trump and Johnson are two politicians who do not do that. They are the exception, they're not the rule.
Yeah, and why do you think it is the right that has been so far gripped by these characters like Trump or Johnson or Modi in India? Why are left-wing leaders not coming up like that, apart from Jeremy Corbyn?
There are plenty of incredibly deceitful left-wing leaders. It's just that we expect less of them. Xi Jinping. I don't trust anything somebody like Xi Jinping says. If you look at Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, or Maduro, or Fidel Castro, they were completely deceitful as well. Okay.
And so you've been a member of the Labour Conservatives and the Labour in the past, and you're currently a member of the Liberal Democrats.
And I've been a Liberal before as well. I was a Liberal for about 5 years, from 1977 to 83, something like that.
So, but will you remain with the Liberal Democrats now, or if Boris Johnson leaves office, would you go back to the Conservatives?
Boris Johnson stopping being party leader would not make me rejoin the Conservative Party. I think he's changed the party so much. He's corrupted so much of what it stands for. I'm a Liberal Democrat for the foreseeable future. You can never say never, because if you've changed your politics in the past, your political views, your religious views are always what you believe right now. You can never guarantee you won't change your views in the future. But there's nothing that would make me rejoin the Conservative Party that I can see right now.
And why was the issue of Brexit so important that you voted for the Liberal Democrats?
Because if you look at the history of Europe, how in the 20th century, twice it tore itself apart in massive wars, leading to enormous death toll. The death toll from World War II was about 65 million altogether. The way that the countries of Western Europe chose to come together post-World War II to break down the historical enmity. France and Germany had fought 3 major wars within the previous 100 years, the 2 world wars and in 1870, massive wars. And the way that they set out to create a new kind of umbrella thing over the level of the nation state, I regard as incredibly important and incredibly positive. Secondly, it's incredibly good for all the member states economically. The British economy was transformed positively by being a part of the European Union. It's enriched us culturally, the free movement of people. The fact that we have 4 million Europeans living in the UK, I regard as enormously positive. There's an endless list of cultural and economic reasons why, and political reasons why I believe that continued British membership of the European Union was incredibly important.
So do you think David Cameron made a mistake in calling the referendum in the first place then?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's been really great chatting to you. You've led a really interesting life, and thank you for being a guest on the Heritage Podcast, Mohammed Amin. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Send me a link to the YouTube once it's published.
Okay, we will do. Thank you. Take care.